The footage looks ordinary, and that's the problem. Everyone believed a quiet husband leaving early for work meant nothing was wrong. The mistake was small. A truck backed in just a little too far, 10 minutes that didn't fit the story. If it was just another Monday morning, why does the timeline collapse the second you press play? This is a real American crime case about how a shrinking window of time exposed everything. It is 5:17 in the morning on a Monday, August 13, 2018. The suburban street in Frederick, Colorado is pitch black, illuminated only by the sterile orange glow of street lamps. A man walks out of his garage, gets into his company-issued Ford F-150 and starts the engine. He pulls forward into the street, stops, puts the truck in reverse, and backs it up the driveway. He angles it sharply, tucking the tailgate as deep into the open garage as it will possibly go. If you watch the black and white surveillance footage from the neighbor's house, it looks entirely unremarkable. Just a guy heading out for the early shift in the oil fields. He walks back and forth from the house to the truck. He loads his gear. He leaves. But there is something deeply wrong with this footage. The man is Chris Watts, and he never, ever parks his truck like that. His neighbor, who owns the camera, knows it. Chris's wife, who enforces strict rules about their property, knows it. But Chris isn't thinking about neighborhood habits this morning. He is thinking about line of sight. He is trying to shield the bed of his truck from the street. Because in those quiet, dark trips between his house and the vehicle, Chris Watts is not loading tools. He is loading the bodies of his pregnant wife and his 2 little girls. He thinks he has planned this perfectly. He thinks his story is airtight. He is confident that his reputation as a quiet, compliant, easygoing father will serve as an invisible shield against any real scrutiny. But Chris has made a fatal miscalculation. He is operating on a broken timeline, a window of time that was supposed to be wide open but shrank by 2 agonizing hours while he was sleeping. And that subtle shift, that missing time, is about to unravel every single lie he is preparing to tell. We have a cultural obsession with the brilliant criminal, the mastermind who leaves no trace. We want to believe that monsters announce themselves, that a family annihilation looks like a scene from a horror movie. But reality is far more pathetic. Most modern crimes aren't solved by the sudden stroke of genius from a weary detective. They are solved by the mundane: a cell phone ping, a router log, a door sensor. Chris Watts did not snap. This was not a crime of sudden, uncontrollable passion. It was a transaction, a horrific, calculated transaction designed to erase his old life so he could step seamlessly into a new one with his coworker Nicole Kessinger. But to pull off the illusion of a family that simply vanished, Chris needed time. He needed the cover of darkness, and he needed his morning routine to look completely uninterrupted. He spent Sunday, August 12th, quietly laying the groundwork. At 5 p.m., he sent a text message to a coworker named Cody Roberts. Chris asked if he could go straight out to the Survey 319 oil site the next morning alone, rather than reporting to the main office first. It was a small request, entirely plausible, but it was the linchpin of his plan. He needed to drive his truck straight to a remote, desolate location, and he needed no one riding shotgun. With the logistics set, all Chris had to do was wait for his wife, Shanann, to get home from a weekend business trip in Arizona. Her flight was scheduled to land early Sunday evening. She would be home, asleep, well before midnight. That would give Chris roughly 5 hours to do what he intended to do. 5 hours to commit the murders, clean the house, stage the scene, pack up his truck, and leave for work exactly when he always did. 5 hours is a long time. It's enough time to scrub floors, to pack suitcases to make it look like she left,
to make sure every single detail aligns with the story he plans to sell. But the weather in the Southwest had other plans. Severe storms delayed Shanann's flight out of Phoenix. She didn't land in Denver until the early hours of Monday morning. By the time her friend Nicole Atkinson dropped her off in the driveway, the clock on the dashboard read 1:48 a.m. The front door opened. Shanann dragged her suitcase inside. The door locked behind her. Chris's 5-hour window had just been violently compressed to little over 3 hours.
And in the anatomy of a cover-up, 3 hours is nothing. Imagine the psychological pressure of a ticking clock. Chris wakes up. His wife is finally home, but the sun is going to rise at 6 a.m. His coworkers expect him at the site. The neighborhood will soon wake up. He has lost his buffer. This compression of time is the invisible force that destroys the Chris Watts case. It forces him to rush. It forces him to improvise. And Chris Watts is not a man who improvises well. Let's look at the story Chris confidently told the police the next day. He claimed his alarm went off at 5 a.m. He said he went downstairs, got his breakfast, and then went back upstairs. According to Chris, he and Shanann had a deeply emotional, tearful conversation in their bedroom. He told her he wanted a separation. She told him he would never see the kids again. It was civil, he insisted. Sad, but civil. Then he claimed he walked downstairs, grabbed his gear, and left for work around 5:30 a.m. He told detectives that Shanann was alive, in bed, probably taking the kids to a friend's place to cool off. It sounds like a coherent narrative. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But digital data doesn't care about narratives. Data only cares about timestamps. And the timestamps tell a story of sheer panic masquerading as a morning routine. Let's cross-reference Chris's story with the digital heartbeat of his own home. The Vivint smart home security system didn't just arm and disarm. It logged every single time a door or window was opened or closed. Chris knew the system existed, but he fundamentally misunderstood how it worked. He thought of it as an alarm. If it wasn't armed, it wouldn't trigger. He didn't realize it was a passive witness, taking notes in the background. At 1:48 a.m., the Vivint system logs the front door opening. This is Shanann arriving home. For the next 3.5 hours, the house is digitally silent. No doors open, no doors close. But at 5:17 a.m., the sensor on the interior door leading from the house to the garage opens. At 5:27 a.m., the GPS data from Chris's Ford F-150 registers the truck pulling out of the driveway. Now look at those numbers, 5:17 a.m. to 5:27 a.m. That is exactly 10 minutes. In Chris's version of events, he woke up at 5 a.m., ate breakfast, went back upstairs, had a long, emotional conversation with his wife about the end of their marriage, watched her cry, packed his lunch, loaded his truck, and left. All in 27 minutes. But it gets worse. The router in the Watts home logged the activity of their smartphones. At 5:18 a.m., the router logs Chris's phone disconnecting from the Wi-Fi and searching for cellular data. He is moving out of range of the house. He is in the garage. He is not having an emotional conversation in the master bedroom. He is aggressively loading his truck. And what about Shanann? If she woke up, packed up her 2 children, loaded their car seats, grabbed her medication, and left the house to go to a friend's place, how did she get out? The Vivint system proves the front door never opened again after 1:48 a.m. The back doors never opened. The windows never opened. The only exit point used that morning was the door leading to the garage where Chris was waiting. The garage where Chris backed his truck up so closely that the tailgate practically touched the interior steps. Because Chris was squeezed for time, he couldn't finish the staging.
He intended to make it look like Shannon had packed up and left him. He took her wedding ring and left it on the kitchen counter, a theatrical symbol of a broken marriage. But look at what else he left behind in the rush of that compressed timeline. Things that entirely contradicted the symbol of the ring. He left her purse. He left her essential lupus medication. He left her shoes sitting by the door. He stripped the fitted sheet off the master bed because it was soiled during the murder, but he didn't remake the bed. He just left the mattress bare. Why would a woman, devastated by a sudden separation, strip the fitted sheet off her bed?
Bed before walking out the door forever? And then there's the phone. Shanann Watts practically lived on her smartphone. She documented everything. She texted her friends constantly. If she left on her own, she would have taken it. But Chris, in his haste, didn't know what to do with it. If he took it with him, its GPS would track alongside his truck all the way to the oil site. If he turned it off, the sudden loss of signal would look suspicious to anyone tracking her location. So he simply shoved it between the cushions of the upstairs couch. He thought he was hiding it, but he was actually anchoring the crime scene to the house. He was out of time. At 5:27 a.m., he had to leave. The sun was coming up, the neighborhood was waking. He drives away, leaving a house full of screaming contradictions. Chris assumed he had a grace period, a few days, maybe a week, where everyone would assume Shanann just needed space. He would come home from work, play the concerned husband, and gently guide the narrative for the local police. He didn't account for Nicole Atkinson. Nicole knew Shanann's routine intimately. She knew Shanann had a doctor's appointment that morning to hear the heartbeat of her unborn son. When Shanann missed it and didn't answer her texts, Nicole didn't wait a few days. She drove directly to the house at 1:48 p.m. Exactly 12 hours after she dropped her friend off, Nicole is standing on the porch, peering through the windows and calling the police. Chris's timeline wasn't just squeezed on the front end by a delayed flight, it was violently shattered on the back end by a loyal friend. By Monday afternoon, Chris is forced to rush home from the oil site. The police are already there. And this is where the timeline shift catches up to him in real time. Officer Scott Coonrod is wearing a body camera. He asks Chris to open the house. Chris walks in. He's trying to act natural, but he's a man desperately trying to remember the script he didn't have time to finish writing. He tells the officer Shanann is probably on a play date, but her kids' car seats are still in the back of her Lexus in the garage. And then they go next door. Neighbor Nate Trinistich has surveillance cameras pointing directly at Chris's driveway. Nate invites Chris and the officer into his living room to watch the footage from that morning. If you want to understand the exact moment a man's psychology collapses, watch the body cam footage of this living room scene. It is one of the most remarkable pieces of video in modern criminal history. You are watching a man realize that he has been caught. On the television screen, the black and white ghost of Chris's truck backs up to the garage. The timestamp reads 5:17 a.m. Chris is standing in Nate's living room, watching himself. His body language betrays everything. He sways back and forth, he crosses his arms, he places his head on top of his head, he stares intently at a commercial on his phone, desperately trying to look anywhere but the television screen. Nate notices. The officer notices. The video plays for nearly an hour of logged time, and it shows exactly zero footage of Shanann Watts or her children leaving the house. Chris's entire story hinges on his wife walking out the front door. The camera proves she didn't. The silence in that living room is deafening. The lie has nowhere left to hide. But the most disturbing part of the timeline isn't the murder itself, or even the sloppy cover-up. It's what Chris did immediately after. We want to believe that committing a horrific act leaves a mark on a person, that they stumble away, shaken, destroyed by the sheer weight of what they've done. We expect a physical manifestation of guilt. Let's look at Chris Watts's morning routine after he left the house at 5:27 a.m. He drives out to CERVI 319.
He buries his wife in a shallow grave. He forces the bodies of his 4-year-old and 3-year-old daughters through the 8-inch hatches of crude oil tanks. And then he goes to work.
He checks his email. He chats with his coworkers. At 8 a.m., less than an hour after disposing of his family, he texts his girlfriend, Nicole Kessinger, just checking in. At 8:30 a.m., he calls the girls' preschool. He leaves a calm, polite voicemail informing the director that the girls will not be returning in the fall. He asks to unenroll them to save the tuition money. He was willing to risk his entire cover-up, exposing the fact that he knew his children weren't coming back just to secure a deposit refund. At 9 a.m., he calls a realtor to discuss selling the house. Later that morning, he orders a breakfast sandwich. This is the uncomfortable reality beneath the Chris Watts case. He didn't snap, he transitioned. He transitioned from family man to bachelor, and he did it with the emotional detachment of someone checking items off a corporate to-do list. Unenroll the kids, call the realtor, text the girlfriend, eat breakfast. The only reason he failed wasn't because a conscience caught up to him. It was because a rainstorm in Phoenix delayed a flight, and a security system kept a digital diary. If Shanann had arrived home at 11 p.m. like she was supposed to, Chris would have had the hours he needed. He would have cleaned the house thoroughly. He would have driven her phone miles away and disposed of it. He would have staged her car. He would have waited to call the school. He would have smoothed out the jagged edges of his timeline. This is why the Chris Watts case still grips the public consciousness. It strips away a very comforting illusion. We rely on the idea that evil is obvious, that it looks like a monster, that it gives off warnings. We think we would know if the person sleeping next to us was capable of looking into the eyes of their own children and deciding they were simply in the way. Chris Watts was considered the nice guy, the quiet guy, the husband who wore a shirt that said "Dad of Girls" and let his assertive wife run the household. He used our reliance on those stereotypes against us. He thought his reputation as an obedient, mild-mannered man would be enough to deflect suspicion from law enforcement. He assumed that if he played the role of the confused, heartbroken husband on the local news, people would simply nod and believe him. And historically, he might have been right. 50 years ago, before home routers, before GPS tracking in trucks, before Vivint door sensors and neighbor surveillance cameras, a man like Chris Watts might have gotten away with this. He would have stood on his porch, told the police his wife ran off with another man, and the world would have pitied him. But he was defeated by the very mundane routines he tried to manipulate. He remembered the neighbor's camera, but forgot the angle. He remembered the security alarm, but forgot the data log. He tried to fake an emotional morning conversation, but forgot his truck's GPS was already tracking his escape. The subtle timeline shift, that missing 2 hours in the dark, forced the mask to slip just enough for the truth to bleed through. As you turn off the lights tonight, as you lock your doors and check your security cameras, consider the most unsettling truth of all. Those cameras, those sensors, those digital footprints, they didn't stop the crime. They only recorded the aftermath. The system worked. The timeline proved the lie. The killer was caught. But look at the footage from 5:17 a.m. one more time. A suburban street, a quiet morning, a normal truck backing into a driveway. Everything looked perfectly fine. Everything sounded perfectly normal. And that is exactly what should keep you awake.